There comes a time in history when the silence of centuries breaks, a time when a voice once ignored begins to echo across the world's most powerful institutions. Today, that voice is India's, and the sound of that voice is not just being heard. It is making the world sit up, take notice, and in many corners of the West even panic. Why? Why is the rise of a democratic nation, a land of peace, tolerance, spirituality, and knowledge, causing anxiety in the minds of those who once claimed to be its saviors? Because the West isn't watching a country rise, it's watching a civilization awaken. You see, when you look at India through a Western lens, you'll always underestimate it. For years, they saw India as a country of snake charmers, poverty, and chaos. But beneath that stereotype was a sleeping giant, a civilization that has given the world zero, surgery, yoga, and philosophy before the West even knew what a book was. And now that ancient spirit has fused with the modern mind, that fusion is powerful, it's unstoppable. And it is why the world is panicking. India is no longer looking to the West for approval, no longer asking for a seat at the table. It is building its own table, its own rules, and most importantly, its own identity. Let's be honest. The West has enjoyed dominance for over 300 years. Military dominance, economic dominance, media dominance, cultural dominance, and most of all, narrative dominance. The power to tell the story of the world in its own image and have that story accepted as the truth. But India refuses to fit into that script anymore. India's rise is not just about GDP numbers or global rankings. It's a rise of confidence, of conviction, of a country that is no longer content with being called developing. It is developing its own vision, its own path, and its own destiny. And the world can feel it. In 2025, India is the fastest growing major economy. It's the most populous democracy. It's a space power, a nuclear power, a software superpower, and most importantly, it's a youth-powered nation. Over 65% of its population is under the age of 35. That means India is not just rising, it is rising young. Young minds, young dreams, young energy, that's a powerful force. And the West knows it, because history has shown that it is young societies, not aging empires, that change the world. The West, with its declining birth rates, aging workforce, and cultural fatigue, sees in India not just a competitor, but a mirror to what it once was. Vibrant, ambitious, hungry. But here's what makes India different. It doesn't want to dominate the world. It wants to uplift it. For centuries, power has meant control, but India is teaching a new definition. Power as responsibility, as dharma, as service. When Indian scientists launched a rocket to the moon for less money than it takes Hollywood to make a movie, the world laughed. But then the rocket landed, and the laughter turned to silence. When India vaccinated over 1 billion people during the pandemic with its own vaccines, the world doubted. But when half the planet depended on India's vaccine diplomacy, the doubt turned to trust. That is the power of quiet strength. And the West doesn't know how to respond to it, because it's used to noise, to bluster, to arrogance. India's rise is silent, but unstoppable, modest, but mighty. The West is panicking because it's not used to competition from the East that is not based on imitation, but innovation. China's rise followed a Western model. Factories, exports, surveillance. India's rise is different. It's chaotic, democratic, spiritual, and digital, all at once. It's messy, but it's magical, because real progress isn't clean. It's alive, and India is alive in ways that the sterile boardrooms of the West can't understand. India is not just building highways and skyscrapers. It's building aspirations. It's creating a generation that speaks English with confidence, codes in Silicon Valley, prays in Sanskrit, and thinks in Hindi. This cultural fusion scares the West because it challenges the idea that modernity means westernization. India is modern but not Western. It's spiritual but scientific. It's ancient but ambitious. And that's the real threat. Not to the world, but to the monopoly the West has had over defining what progress looks like. For too long, The West assumed that to become successful, a country must become more like them, but India is saying, we'll become successful by becoming more like us. That's revolutionary. That's terrifying to those who built empires on the assumption that only their way works. The world is changing, and the center of gravity is shifting. In diplomacy, India now speaks with a voice that cannot be ignored. Whether it's climate change or global conflict, India's position matters. Not because of muscle, but because of moral authority. Not because of bombs, but because of balance. The West once lectured India, now it listens to India. That's not a small shift. It's a tectonic one. And every tectonic shift creates tremors. Those tremors are being felt in think tanks, editorial rooms, policy forums, and intelligence agencies across the West. Because when India speaks of multipolarity, it's not just about geopolitics, it's about worldview, about breaking the binary of us vs them, and building a global community that thrives on cooperation, not coercion. India doesn't want a new Cold War. It wants a warm world, a world where humanity comes before hegemony. That is threatening to those who thrive on division. But here's the truth: India is not rising to threaten the world. It is rising to serve it. It is rising to remind the world of values that have been buried beneath greed and power. Compassion, knowledge, unity, and peace. It is rising not with a sword, but with a lamp of knowledge, a lamp of culture, a lamp of character. And the darkness is afraid. Make no mistake, this panic isn't new. History has seen it before. When Indian mathematicians gave the world the decimal system, the West ridiculed it, then adopted it. When Indian spirituality spread through yoga and meditation, it was dismissed, then embraced. When Indian cuisine, fashion, and cinema reached every corner of the globe, it was labeled exotic. Now it's mainstream. India leads by influence, not imposition, and influence is more powerful than intimidation. This is why the world is watching. And this is why the West is nervous, because you can't colonize a confident mind. And that's what India is building, 1 billion confident minds. Young Indians are no longer asking, can I compete with the world? They're asking, why should I compete when I can create? Create solutions. Create companies, create culture. And when you create, you lead. That's the quiet revolution happening in India. It's in the startups, solving rural problems with AI. It's in the classrooms where young girls code and dream. It's in the temples where tradition and technology sit side by side. It's in the villages with solar power and smartphones. It's in the soldiers who protect borders, and in the scientists who explore the stars. It's in every corner of the country that refuses to be put in a box. India is not rising to fit into someone else's frame. It is rising to paint its own canvas. And when a civilization starts painting again, after centuries of being painted over, the colors are bold, bright, and sometimes threatening to those who preferred black and white. But history doesn't wait for comfort zones. It moves with courage, and India is moving with courage. So if the West is panicking, let them. Let them, because panic is the first step to recognition. Let them, because recognition is the first step to respect. Let them, because respect is the first step to partnership. And partnership is what the world needs most. A partnership of equals, of East and West, of tradition and modernity, of mind and heart. India isn't rising alone. It's rising to lift the world with it. That's the dream of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. That's the heart of Indian philosophy. And that's the future the world must embrace, not with panic but with purpose, not with fear but with faith, because when India rises, it doesn't rise above others, it rises with them. And that, my friends, is not a threat. That is a gift the world is finally beginning to unwrap. And once opened, it will change everything, because when 1/6 of humanity starts believing in its own power, not to conquer, but to contribute, the world doesn't panic. The world transforms. India's rise is not just an economic event. It's not just about statistics, GDP growth, or a booming tech sector. It's something far deeper. It is reshaping global power dynamics in ways the world has not seen in over a century. And the West is watching closely, not with hostility, but with unease. Not because it wishes India harm, but because it recognizes something profound is happening. What the West is witnessing is the quiet disruption of a long-standing global order, an order that has, for generations, been dominated by a singular worldview. For centuries, the centers of power, economic, military, cultural, have been rooted in the West. They created the rules. They shaped the narratives. They decided what progress looked like and who was allowed to lead. But today, that monopoly is being challenged, not by aggression, not by force, but by the steady, undeniable rise of a self-confident, sovereign, and civilizational state, India. India is not just another country climbing the economic ladder. It is a civilization that remembers who it is, a nation that is not borrowing its identity from someone else's past, but reclaiming its own. And that kind of resurgence, the rise of a civilization that has its own values, its own vision, its own voice, is what truly shakes the foundations of global power. Because when India rises, it does not rise to imitate. It rises to innovate, on its own terms, and that's what the West finds difficult to digest. For decades, rising nations were expected to follow a template, liberalize the economy, mimic Western political institutions, adopt Western lifestyles, and seek validation from Western powers. India is doing none of that. It is growing, yes, but it is doing so while remaining true to its roots. It's building digital highways while preserving spiritual traditions. It's expanding its global influence while staying deeply democratic. It's writing a new success story, one where the East does not have to become the West to be powerful. This is not just a shift in economics. It is a shift in narrative, a shift in power, a shift in how the world sees itself. And that is why the world, especially the Western world, is unsettled. Because for the first time in a long time, they are facing a civilization, state that is not asking for a seat at the table. It's bringing its own table, and others are beginning to pull up chairs. That is how global orders change, not with explosions, but with quiet conviction. India's rise, therefore, is not a headline. It is a historical turning point. A moment when a 5000-year-old civilization stops surviving and starts leading. Not through dominance, but through dignity. And when dignity becomes a nation's currency, the world cannot afford to ignore it. India's rise is not a random stroke of luck or a temporary economic boom. It is the result of powerful forces coming together. Forces that are shaping not just a nation, but a new global era. India's demographic strength, economic acceleration, technological capabilities, and cultural resurgence together form a tidal wave of transformation. And this wave doesn't just represent growth. It signals something far more profound, a civilizational awakening. This awakening is not about catching up, it's about standing up. For too long, India was expected to remain a background character in a play directed by others. The West wrote the script, cast the roles, and set the stage. And India, though ancient and rich in wisdom, was told to sit quietly in the second row, applaud politely, and be grateful for any recognition. But those days are gone. Today, India is rewriting the script, and it is no longer content to play second fiddle in a Western-dominated narrative, because this is not just about development, it is about destiny. India's demographic strength is unmatched. With a population of over 1.4 billion and the youngest workforce on the planet, India is not growing old, it's growing bold. Each year, millions of young Indians step into the world armed with education, ambition, and a hunger to build something better. Not just for themselves, but for their communities, their country, and the world. And that demographic energy is now powered by economic momentum. India's economy is surging forward, not just in size, but in sophistication. From manufacturing and infrastructure to digital innovation and clean energy, India is no longer the back office of the world. It is becoming the brain, the builder, the architect of a new age of inclusive growth. But this rise isn't fueled by numbers alone. It is amplified by technology. India today is a digital powerhouse, with one of the world's most expansive digital payment networks record. Breaking app usage and revolutionary public platforms like Aadhaar and UPI, India isn't following tech trends. It's setting them from villages connected by fiber optics to startups solving real world problems with AI and machine learning. India is showing the world how technology can empower, not just profit. And perhaps most importantly, alongside this digital and economic revolution, a deeper resurgence is unfolding, a cultural renaissance. Indian philosophy, art, literature, music, cinema, cuisine, and spirituality are once again capturing the world's attention not as exotic artifacts, but as living, breathing expressions of a civilization that never died. It just waited for the world to catch up. Now that moment has arrived. This is not just national progress. It is civilizational pride. A society reclaiming its soul, reconnecting with its ancient roots while reaching boldly into the future. A people saying, we remember who we are, and we will no longer let others define us. This civilizational confidence is India's greatest strength. Because when a nation knows its worth, it cannot be dismissed. When a people rediscover their voice, they will no longer echo someone else's story. India is not rising to replace the West. It's rising to rebalance the world, to bring back harmony where there was hierarchy, to contribute, not to conform, to lead, not to dominate. That is why this moment matters. It's not just about more jobs, higher GDP, or stronger infrastructure, though all of that is happening. It's about the spirit of a civilization stretching, awakening, remembering, and declaring to the world, we are not the past, we are the present, and we are the future. And that future will not be written in someone else's language. It will be written in the voice of India, a voice of depth, dignity, and destiny. The truth is, the West's panic is not rooted in hatred. It's rooted in loss, a loss of monopoly. For centuries, the West has enjoyed uncontested dominance over global influence, military, ideological, cultural, and economic. It built systems where it held the pen, wrote the rules, and judged the players. Whether through military alliances, economic institutions, media networks, or educational frameworks, the West positioned itself as the model for success, the standard everyone else had to meet. And for decades, many nations tried to fit that mold. They copied systems, adopted policies, followed the script, and in doing so, hoped to gain a place at the table. But India is doing something radically different. India is not asking for permission. It is not chasing validation. It is not trying to become a mirror image of the West. Instead, India is building something unique, something grounded in its own roots, yet reaching into the future. That's what unsettles the old powers, because India represents a model that refuses to imitate. It dares to innovate on its own terms. And when a nation this large, this ancient, and this capable begins to innovate from a place of cultural confidence, not colonial residue, it shifts the axis of influence. Take military strength, for example. India is not projecting power to invade others. It is building a defense ecosystem rooted in self-reliance. It's asserting sovereignty, not supremacy. On the ideological front, India is not exporting revolutions or enforcing dogma. Instead, it offers a world shaped by balance, coexistence, and dharma, a philosophy that believes in unity through diversity, not uniformity through force. In the cultural arena, the West once dominated global taste. Fashion, films, language, and lifestyle were all dictated by Western aesthetics. But today, Indian culture is no longer just surviving. It's thriving. Bollywood is global. Indian music plays in nightclubs in Europe. Yoga studios are opening on every street in New York. Indian food is no longer foreign, it's familiar. The cultural tide is turning, and it's flowing from east to west. And in the economic realm, India is not following a rigid Western blueprint. It's not waiting for external loans or policy prescriptions. It's crafting its own growth story, built on digital empowerment, grassroots innovation, entrepreneurial energy, and inclusive ambition. This independence of thought, this refusal to conform, is what truly shakes the West. Because when influence is no longer one, directional, when the power to inspire and lead shifts from the hands of the few to the voices of the many, that is when the real change begins. India's rise is not hostile, it's not aggressive, but it is assertive, and that assertiveness says, we will not be a copy, we will be a catalyst for a new way of thinking, a new global order, not based on dominance but on dialogue, not on coercion but on collaboration. This is what the West fears, not because it is evil, but because it is unfamiliar. For too long, the world was told there was only one way to be modern, one way to grow, one way to succeed. But India is showing the world that there are many paths, and some of them go through ancient temples, through village innovation centers, through regional languages, and through spiritual awakening. India is proving that it can be both deeply rooted and forward-looking, that it can honor its past without being held hostage by it, that it can rise without replacing, shine without shadowing others, lead without losing its soul. And in that balance lies the future. So yes, the West is panicking, because for the first time it is facing a partner, not a pupil, a sovereign mind, not a subordinate one, and most of all, a civilization that doesn't want to be like anyone else but fully, unapologetically itself. And that, more than anything else, signals that the world is changing and India is helping to lead that change.